Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the international affairs, foreign policy, and global development community, and world news aficionados of all stripes. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg, editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. My guest today, Ban Ki-moon, served as the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations from 2007 through 2016. He is out with a new memoir titled Resolved: Uniting Nations in a Divided World. The book gives his first-person account as the leader of the United Nations who navigates complex crises around the world. This includes Syria, Myanmar, Israel and Palestine, the West Africa Ebola outbreak, and much, much more. He also offers his perspective and a behind-the-scenes account of some key UN successes during his tenure, including the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement and the advent of the Sustainable Development Goals. I do highly recommend the book. It really offers a global tour of some key past and current diplomatic crises. I also tell this to Ban during our conversation, but the book is refreshingly candid. I covered Ban as a journalist while he was Secretary General, and he had a very well-earned reputation for being tight-lipped and just diplomatic all the time, rarely ever breaching protocol. But the book at times is very undiplomatic and in very interesting ways. We cover quite a bit of ground in this interview, including his perspective on what the COVID crisis revealed about the strengths and weaknesses of the United Nations, what can be done to bolster multilateralism today, his frustrations with the Security Council, and what advice he might offer to his successor, Antonio Guterres. And we do spend a good deal of time talking about climate change diplomacy, which was Ban's signature issue as Secretary General. And before we get to my conversation with Ban Ki-moon, I do want to plug another book titled For the Love of Hong Kong, a memoir from my city under siege by Hana Meihan Davis. This is the debut publication from Global Dispatches that tells the story of Hong Kong's rapid descent into authoritarian rule as told from the perspective of a young Hong Konger who was born into the pro-democracy movement. And as I record this, the book is currently a top new release on Amazon. I would love to keep up that momentum and encourage you all to buy a copy and share it with friends and colleagues. I'll post a link to the book in the show notes. You can also find it by visiting globaldispatches.org. And now here is my conversation with former United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Congratulations to you on the book. I highly recommend it for anyone who's interested in the United Nations and international affairs. It's an excellent read and I think a useful addition to the historic record. So thank you for writing it.
Well, it is me who should thank you and for the audience to listen to my stories. If I may say just half a minute why I have written this book is that this is about my life story and my philosophy for our future. I hope my memoir, Resolved: Uniting the Nations in a Divided World, will spread my ideas and stories to the wide audience that is responsible for the world today and tomorrow. I just humbly wish that it will inspire possibility, spark actions, and improve the cooperation, and ultimately encourage people around the world to become a global citizens. I have been emphasizing the importance of global citizenship, particularly for among the world political leaders and business leaders. That is my main and humble purpose of writing this book. This is my first ever book written in my 76 years of life history.
Well, I should just say, as a journalist who covered you for 10 years, I was just very pleasantly surprised with how candid you were in the course of the book. At many times during reading the book, I almost laughed out loud to myself when you would say something that you would never have uttered as Secretary General or have gotten away with. So again, thank you for writing a candid book. And I'd like to just kick off this conversation by asking you to reflect on the United Nations response to COVID. This is arguably the single greatest shock to the international system since the advent of the UN, since World War II. And I'm curious to learn from you what this moment revealed to you about the UN system. And let's start with strengths. What did COVID show you about the value of the UN in a global crisis like this?
Coronavirus has in fact totally locked down the whole of our society. Never in the history, even during the Second World War, we have we were never been such a completely locked down all throughout the world. Almost 220 countries, including 193 UN member states, are completely affected. Why is it so? Because we have been neglecting this climate action. This has a very close relationship because we have been neglecting and abusing the privilege which has been given by our nature. But what about then United Nations? UN should have been working much more in close cooperation among the agencies. Now it has been given only to WHO. Then United States under President Trump has withdrawn, criticizing the WHO and other agencies. So it was morally wrong and it was politically unwise. Look at the case of Ebola in 2014, when in Ebola just spread to Western African countries. I had a very close relationship, cooperation with WHO Director General Margaret Chan, and we have mobilized all the agencies, all the countries together. Mm-hmm. Now, it has been given to just the WHO, and WHO has been very much isolated because US has withdrawn and criticizing. For the first time in history of the United Nations, during my time in 2014, United Nations has established UNMIR, United Nations Ebola Emergency Response Mission. Under this UNMIR system, led by me and working very closely with the US President Obama and WHO, World Bank, and IMF, we have been really mobilizing all tools, agencies of the United Nations. With that, we were able to rapidly eradicate Ebola, which swept Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea at the time. This was the one lesson which we have to do. We should have done. I telephoned to Tedros, Director General of WHO, at the beginning of this March last year. Why don't you mobilize a whole United Nations system? This is one lesson which we have to learn.
Yes. I remember in your book, you discussed that phone call you had with Dr. Tedros, urging him to mobilize all the UN agencies and not just let the burden of COVID fall exclusively on the shoulders of the World Health Organization. Yeah. Your answer to that question about COVID and the UN leads nicely to my next question, which is about multilateralism in the world today. These last few years have been very challenging times for multilateralism, with, among other things, the previous US administration, as you just cited, withdrawing from key multilateral agencies. I've had a former diplomat on the show before who likened multilateralism to a muscle and needs to be used or it will weaken and atrophy. So what today can be done to more robustly strengthen multilateralism?
In this time of crisis, no country, however powerful or resourceful, can handle all this global crisis which we are facing. And that is a lesson, and that's the importance of multilateralism. United Nations is the symbol and backbone of the multilateralism. So UN should be empowered fully and much more with the necessary resources and political support by the member states. Now, particularly during the time of President Trump of the United States, multilateralism became in disarray. U.S., which has been the champion in human rights, withdrew from the Human Rights Council. In fact, Human Rights Council was created as a reform measure at the strong request of United States in 2006. From Human Rights Commission was made into Human Rights Council. Mm-hmm. Then they withdrew from JCPOA, they withdrew from WHO, and they have been taking the policy of America first. That leadership missing in the global diplomacy has made the multilateralism in disarray. Everybody, every country was going for themselves. That is why we are suffering from this corona pandemic. No one will be safe and secured until everyone is safe and supported. That is the hard lessons which we have learned this time. I am very pleased to see President Joe Biden as his first presidential act to return to Paris Climate Change Agreement, and also he is leading, try to mobilize multilateral forces. I sincerely hope that the G7 summit, which will be held in a few days in United Kingdom, will really be an occasion where the biggest and richest countries in the world will really be united and try to do maximum they could do. First things, I think they should save the lives of human beings around the world, particularly those countries in developing world. They are helpless to take care of themselves. Therefore, I joined many world leaders, former world leaders, 230 world leaders, and that G7 leaders, a letter of appeal to G7 leaders that they should really mobilize the necessary funding, at least more than $40 billion to provide vaccines and all this medical equipment, resuscitate the economy. So they have political and moral responsibility. That is the importance of G7. Now that multilateralism is now coming back. At the same time, we really hope that those countries like G20, they should be fully united to address this current crisis. That's my sincere hope as former Secretary General.
So, I mean, is it your sense that uniting the G20 specifically around a common response to the coronavirus pandemic, which is now, well into its second year, that those actions can be harnessed to strengthen multilateralism more broadly?
Yes. Now, WHO has initiated ACTA, Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. That is a groundbreaking global collaboration initiated for development, production, and equitable access to COVID-19 test, treatment, and vaccines. Again, I strongly urge that G7 leaders in Cornwall, United Kingdom, will decide to provide the necessary financial and technological support for the developing countries. Another very important, serious, urgent issue is climate change.
Mm-hmm.
I am urging G7 leaders to decide and make a roadmap how they are going to mobilize $100 billion they have promised in Paris Agreement to provide, first of all, financial assistance, science and technological assistance to many vulnerable countries, small island developing countries, and most of the developing countries. They are the ones who have been hit worst and most without having contributed not much. It is the industrialized countries who have contributed most of the greenhouse gas emissions, which have created this current climate crisis. And therefore, they have again moral and political responsibility.
So we are speaking just a few months ahead of a major climate agreement, climate summit in Glasgow, which is built upon the Paris Agreement that you devote a lot of time in your book to discussing and how the Paris Agreement came to be. What advice might you give your successor, Antonio Guterres, right now in the lead up to this crucial climate summit that is intended to increase the ambition and the scale of national contributions, what each country will do to confront the climate crisis?
Yeah, first of all, I'm very happy that to see that my successor, Antonio Guterres, has been recommended by the Security Council unanimously for a second term. So he will be soon appointed for second term. So he has a renewed authority and mandate. And therefore, I hope he will closely coordinate and cooperate and exercise his leadership as a Secretary General to make sure that this forthcoming COP26 in Glasgow will be a great success. Now, this is going to be 26. My experience is that each and every COP has its own strengths and weaknesses. In some COPs, we made considerable progress. In some COPs, not much, very weak, sometimes very much a division. But United Kingdom, as a member of G7, and they have been one of the strong supporters on climate action. Therefore, I really hope that we will know that the curve is bending to a sustainable future of less than 1.5 degrees Celsius above warming, that the biggest emitters, they are the biggest emitters, will have made ambitious commitment to cut emissions by more than 50% in their nationally determined contributions.
That's your definition of success at this coming conference
of course,
of parties.
Another, as I said already, $100 billion to help those small island and developing countries in their mitigation and adaptation efforts. Without every country, all the countries on board, nobody will be safe from this climate crisis. That is what I'd like to emphasize. I'd like to also hope the language will have changed from build back better after COVID-19 to building forward with equality, justice, and sustainability, leaving no one behind. With that in mind, I do hope that this COP will be more inclusive than any of the previous COPs. While that may be challenging given the pandemic, now more than ever, it is more important than ever that those voices from the, I'm sorry.
No, I love the passion.
Global
this
South.
Is what I was used to when seeing you as Secretary General. And the one issue in which you were most passionate was always climate from an early stage too, before it was fashionable.
So we have to work for Global South and also young generation who will be living in this world. So they should be all present and at the forefront. It's not only right thing to do to put those most at risk at the center of discussion, but it's also shown to be more effective to climate outcomes. There should be a firm commitment for net zero carbon neutrality by 2050. Like most important countries, the United States, European Union, Japan, Korea have made it a firm commitment. China even made a commitment for net zero by 2060. We can understand the magnanimity and size of China's challenges. 2060 was welcomed by world leaders. So this is my strong message.
So throughout your book and in your answer to me just now, you reaffirm and you discuss throughout that global problems like climate change require global solutions. One of the key global problems today is rising authoritarianism and democratic decline. And this is a global problem. No region is immune. This is happening everywhere around the world. But is this the kind of problem that has a global solution? Is there a multilateralist answer to the challenge of rising authoritarianism?
Now, in this 21st century, when democracy and the human rights and justice and all these important principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations should have been much more widely disseminated and practiced. But as we are entering into as we have already entered into 21st century, where we have full use of science and technology and much better, tools to make our life much more prosperous and convenient. But when it comes to political scene, there are more and more people are becoming more abusing their rights as mandated by their own people. This is because the role of the United Nations, particularly the Security Council, is not exercising their duty and their right enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. Because of the division of the Security Council, what have they done for the case of Syria? It's already 10 years, exactly 10 years since 2011, now 2021. 6.6 million people from Syria have fled their country, become refugees. And the remaining all people are now living under extremely difficult economic situation because Syria Security Council has not been able to take any action. Even humanitarian actions have been vetoed by some of the permanent members of the Security Council. So that is what we have been seeing. This is not justice. This is not right. That is why people are crying out for the reform of the Security Council. Now, again, there are many regional blocs, regional groups, like League of Arab States, African Union, ASEAN, or American OAS, etc., etc. These regional groups should be also empowered. They should be much more engaged in their regional issues, but mostly they are divided. That is a very sad phenomena at this time. As a Secretary General, I have been really engaging with each and every leader, whether they are democratic or undemocratic. But I have been really urging them that you should work for their own people. It's not right. It's not justice. Justice will prevail. You may just go like this way. The justice will prevail, if not now, tomorrow. If not tomorrow, soon, surely in the very near future. This is why we have established the ICC, International Criminal Court. But because of the division again, for the Security Council. Security Council is not able to recommend to indict those responsible people to ICC.
Going forward, as you mentioned earlier, we're speaking just as your successor, Antonio Guterres, was recommended by the Security Council, despite the divisions that you just articulated, for another 5-year term. Over the course of the next 5 years, what will you be looking towards to suggest to you whether or not the United Nations is succeeding or failing in living up to its ideals?
The United Nations should be successful, must be successful. That's the only national, international organization created by whole world's people. This is the place where almost all the nations, small and big, powerful or weak, or rich and poor. So this is the only forum where we can really discuss a whole world's program. We have so many subsidiary organizations. We have so many, at least 16 specialized agencies where each and every issues which we are now going through experiencing in this world, including climate and human rights and development, can be discussed. Again, during my time in 2015, the United Nations has presented two most ambitious, most far-reaching visions. That is a climate change agreement, Paris Climate Change Agreement, and also 17 goals with the Sustainable Development Goals. 17 goals cover each and every aspect of human lives and our nature. If we really implement all these 17 goals by 2030, there will be nobody will suffer from abject poverty. Nobody will suffer from injustice, human rights issues, men and women, and our world's people will be able to live harmoniously with our nature. That is the vision. I think that's the most far-reaching, most ambitious and far-reaching vision the United Nations has been presented. Those two visions must be held and implemented with the wholehearted support and participation of all the countries.
Well, Mr. Secretary General, thank you so much for your time and for your passion on these issues. And again, the book is a wonderful tour around the world. It's a very valuable addition to anyone who wants to learn more about the United Nations and international affairs and about you. It's a great personal story as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Ban Ki-moon. That was great. And his book is out this June from Columbia University Press. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. We publish 2 episodes like this every week, focusing on topics of importance to the global affairs community. If you have not already done so, please hit the subscribe button in your podcast listening app. And if you are a regular listener and you have a suggestion for me of people you'd like me to interview or topics you'd like me to cover, please hit me up on Twitter at Mark L. Goldberg, or you can send me an email using the contact button on globaldispatchespodcast.com. Thank you all. See you next time. Bye.